I want to let you in on a secret about me. It appears I suffer from a strange kind of affliction, and I'm not sure it happens to anybody else but me. Lean in closer to the speaker because I don't want a lot of people to know. My hair is changing color, and it takes some extra effort to get off the couch. I'm using words like flim-flam and balderdash, and when I look into the mirror, my grandfather's face stares back at me. I first started noticing symptoms a couple of years ago when I passed the age of 50. And here's another thing that's even more disturbing about my condition. Books and authors I used to enjoy now seem very juvenile. Dialogue that sounded witty when I was younger now sounds like it was written by and for 12-year-olds. And characters my age and above seem to revert to stereotype and do not think and act with any kind of nuance or maturity. Well, nothing happened to those books, but something happened to me. And it's not all bad, but it left me wondering, where are the books for people like me? For grown-ups, for those who really know what it's like to age, to face ageist stereotypes, or to suddenly find themselves out of work because it's cheaper to hire younger people. And that's what we're going to focus on in this episode. Hi, I'm Howard Lovy. I'm 52 years old and managing editor of the Alliance of Independent Authors. You're listening to IndieVoices. Today, we're talking to Claire Baldry, 63 years old and an indie author who is also an advocate for older authors. Maggie Christensen, 73 years old, who writes about mature women facing life-changing situations. And of course, Dan Holloway will join us for an update on the news around the indie publishing world. My first guest is Claire Baldry of East Sussex in the UK. And although it's normally considered impolite to mention people's ages, I think she'll be fine with me telling everybody she just turned 63 years old. A few years ago, Claire retired from her career as an educator, but then launched right into her next career as a self-published author, speaker, and performance poet. That in itself is an accomplishment, but then she also became an advocate for older authors, and I'll let her explain how and why that happened. Welcome to IndieVoices, Claire.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We'll talk about your work as an author and a poet, but first let's discuss your advocacy for older readers and authors. How did that come about?
Well, it all started by accident, really. I wrote my first novel last year, and as most debut novelists do, I went on lots of Facebook groups and I spoke to other authors. And quite innocently, one day, I asked a question, and I just said, why is it that traditional publishing houses don't seem interested in books which have lots of older characters or which are written by older authors? And instead of getting one or two answers, the whole of Facebook seemed to explode in my face. Everybody said, this is what we've been asking for years. We want to have more recognition. So I set up a Facebook group called Books for Older Readers. We had a lot of arguments about the word old. Mm-hmm. I used the word older rather than older okay. As opposed to younger.
It's all relative. It's all relative.
It didn't worry me in the slightest. But some people said, we've got to find another word. Anyway, we never have. And we have quite a lot of members for that group. But I also, because I like setting up websites, I created a website called Books for Older Readers, which is basically a place where readers can go and browse. And we gradually teased out themes which might appeal to older readers, such as bereavement, life after divorce, starting a second career. And we very much looked at it in terms of themes rather than age. And I must have about 50 or 60 books on there now, and authors coming to me all the time saying, can my book go on there? The interesting thing about it is that when I first started the website, I suppose we had about a couple of hundred hits in the first few weeks, and now it's getting thousands, and it increases every month.
You've certainly hit on something, and it seems like, again, traditional publishing houses are their own worst enemy. Older readers are a growing demographic, and many of them have a lot of time to read. So why do you think they're so reluctant to publish books that appeal to them?
It's ridiculous, isn't it? Because older readers are living longer, they've got time on their hands, they're more healthy, and they spend a lot of money on books. So you'd think that the traditional publishing houses would be looking to get books which appeal to them. I think it's very much about tradition. Traditionally, publishing houses have gone to younger authors because they can develop them, because they might get 20 or 30 novels out of them, and that's what they want to do. But life's changing.
I have a feeling that they're going to catch on once they see how successful the indies are.
Yes.
Again, the indies are the innovators, and eventually the big publishers will probably follow along.
On the other hand, if you are an older writer, you may not wish to go to a traditional publishing house. Because I think older writers, certainly myself, we've got a lot of life experience and we do like to do things our own way.
Exactly.
So it may be that's not what we want.
So what are the biggest concerns among older authors or readers?
Apart from what I already said about the word old, we came across quite a lot of people who said, we don't want to be categorised. We don't want people telling us what we should be reading at any particular age. Now, nobody's telling people what they should be reading. You read whatever you want to read. But it is helpful if you've got a bookmark which says, this might appeal to you. Nobody complains about the phrase chicklit. That's the same thing, really. So I don't think it's very valid. Apart from that, not really a lot of concerns. I mean, older authors want to be recognised. They don't want to be written off as something that no one's interested in. But older readers are not saying that. They're saying, we really want to have books which are written by you.
Right. Well, to me, it's also a question of maturity in the plot and in the writing.
Well, I think so. And I, as you said, I'm 63. If you haven't yet reached 63, you don't know what that feels like. Now, there are lots of younger authors who portray older people very skillfully. But at the end of the day, they haven't had the life experience that those of us of my age have had. They don't know what it feels like the first time your grown-up children say, Mum, you should really put a coat on because it's cold outside and you're not getting any younger. And those sorts of things can be shared by older readers in books.
Well, I've asked this before when I've had guests from other niche demographics, the immigrant community or LGBTQ community. Why is it important to see yourself in the books you read?
I think it's all about connection and it's all about empathy. I mean, yes, sometimes it's nice to read something that takes you out of your comfort zone and enters a completely different world. But at the end of the day, it's comfortable to read about people who've had similar experiences to yourself, because then you get that connection between author and reader. And the reader says to themselves, I've never quite looked at it that way, but I have been there. So you get all those wonderful connections which make reading such a positive experience.
Now, you've gotten some attention for your advocacy. You've been interviewed by the BBC, and it sounds like this issue is resonating in the literary world. Are you a sort of a spokesman for your generation now?
Well, if I am, I didn't intend to be. It just happened. I'd like to tell you that I had this wonderful vision and that I was determined to put it into place. But it wasn't like that at all. It just happened. And I said, I'll just take it wherever it goes. But one thing is for certain, we've got to keep saying it. I'm not going to let it drop, because that's the only way that in the end we will be recognised. And once you start getting lots of people going on a Facebook group, lots of people looking at the website, the BBC interested, then you know that things are beginning to happen. So I'm not going to let it go.
So let's talk a little bit about your work. You recently self-published your first novel called Different Genes, and that's Genes, not the jeans you wear. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Okay. It's a love story. It's about a couple in their 60s who meet on the internet. Quite a lot about people who are older, who's been married before, so perhaps a bit set in their ways, and they have to adjust to each other. On the other hand, they've got life experiences which help them create a positive relationship. And woven into that story is a story about adoption. So that's where the different genes phrase comes in. The female character, who's called Louise, early on in the novel, her mother dies. It starts at her mother's funeral, and then she discovers that she was adopted when she was 3 and she'd never been told. So the whole story, while their relationship is building together, they go on a search to find out about her past. So it takes you back into the 50s, and then it moves through time and finishes up with her understanding and finding out what happened and why she was adopted. And I can't tell you that, otherwise I'll give the whole plot away.
Right, right. Well, that sounds fascinating. So what's next for you as an author and also as an advocate for older readers and authors?
I've got a poetry book which is in print at the moment. It very much deals actually with issues which I think will appeal to older readers. There are poems, quite serious ones, about global warming and the sort of inheritance of the environment that we're going to give to our children, but also quite a wry look at issues which concern older people, like getting irritated about mobile phones on trains and those sorts of things as well. And I do have another novel which is possibly about halfway through. It's called My Daughter's Wedding, and it's about all those relationships which come together at a wedding, whether people actually like their family or not. So I'm rather enjoying writing that. That will probably come out next year.
Great. Well, what's your advice to older indie authors out there right now who feel like maybe they're not being taken seriously by publishing houses, or they're a little unsure of themselves because they're not certain if they'll be accepted by a wider audience? So do you have any advice?
The only advice I can give to them really is to believe in themselves. We have got so much to give. I'm not trying to be patronising, but we've got a lot more life experience than younger people who work in publishing houses often. Believe in yourself, and maybe this is a very good time to do it, because the publishing world seems to be waking up to what older readers want.
Well, thank you, Claire, for your advocacy and on behalf of older readers, and thank you for appearing on IndieVoices.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, thanks, Claire. Bye.
Bye.
My next guest is truly an international woman of mystery. She lives in Australia, but got there by way of Scotland, Oregon, and California. She also writes stories for and about older women. When she started out, she was told that nobody wanted to read stories about old people. Fortunately, she didn't listen. So joining me now from Australia is Maggie Christensen. Welcome to IndieVoices, Maggie.
Thanks for inviting me along, Howard.
So tell us about some of the attitudes you've come across as you found your target audience.
Well, as you said, I was told people didn't want to read about older women getting it together. Initially, I put up excerpts of my first book on a website to gain comments, and that was the reaction I got, which was rather surprising. But I decided to continue, although trad publishers also told me that I didn't fit their list. But I've been thrilled at the number of people who want to read my books. Baby boomers were the generation that made young adult books popular, and they now want to read other people like themselves.
So you write about mature women facing life-changing situations. What kinds of situations are those?
Well, I sort of believe that the older people, they still want the happy ever after. They experience situations that younger people don't experience, such as aging parents, maybe widowhood, divorce, grown children, grandchildren, stepchildren, redundancy, retrenchment, downsizing, these sort of things. And I try to include those things in my books. So, for example, in Band of Gold, Anna's husband puts the wedding ring on the table on Christmas morning and says that he doesn't want to be married anymore. In another book, Broken Threads, Jan's son dies in a surfing accident at the beginning of the book. In The Sand Dollar, I wrote that when I was facing a redundancy, so my character faces a redundancy, and then at the age of 59, she discovers that she was adopted as a baby. What else? In Champagne Breakfast, I'll just go one more. 50-year-old Rosa is drinking champagne on her own on her 50th birthday, having just finished a 6-year relationship with her boss.
So these are situations that maybe a younger person could write about in theory, but people with more life experience could actually understand. I'm thinking about it, what you said about facing redundancies, and I think a lot of times older workers are less valued for some strange reason, for some counterproductive reason, and they're sometimes among the first to go.
Oh, if they're in a senior position, then it's easier to get rid of the more expensive staff member.
Now, you wrote to me that one reason you went indie is because you're a bit of a control freak, but there's another element, and I don't want to be morbid, but many older authors just literally do not have the time to wait by the phone for a big publisher to call. Do you feel that sense of urgency?
Yeah, I do now. Actually, it's funny. When I first started writing, I met an older indie author. She was a bit older than I was, and she said she didn't have time to wait for a publisher. And at the time, I thought that was a bit strange, but I understand that now. I published my first book, Howard, in 2014. And even if I'd been picked up by a trad publisher then, I would only have 2 or maybe 3 books out. Whereas as it is, I've published 7 books.
Right. There's just a snail's pace.
Yeah.
How's business, though? I mean, it seems like these days you need to promote yourself on social media and online. Is your audience there?
It is. It's been a huge, steep learning curve, and I'm still on it. But I'm finding that you really have to spend money on marketing to get the results, and it's beginning to pay off.
And marketing specifically to people in your demographic?
Yes, which I do marketing on Amazon ads, and it seems to be attracting people in my demographic. And I also, through our local bookshops, where I live, there's quite a large older age group live, and the local bookshops find my books go very well. And I find I'm being asked to talk with senior citizens groups and retirement villages and things like that from people who have picked up my books, read them and enjoyed them and want to spread the word.
Great. So can you give me an example of a stereotype of older people that you try to dispel?
Yeah, I find that in some books I read, I get really annoyed because older people are portrayed as frail, all used up, invisible, or even as caricatures where they're ridiculed. Mm-hmm. Or they're sort of sidelined and they're a minor character. I like characters that are real, with real issues and real feelings. And hopefully I'm successful in doing that. Right.
The kind of the old, says inappropriate things, kind of a comedy character rather than a real person.
Yes, yeah. Or someone who's just so frail they can't get around. I think when younger writers write about older people, they have this idea that when they get beyond a certain age, then they won't be able to do things anymore, and their life is just going to fall apart, which is not the case.
Well, you sound very young to me. How old are you?
I'm 73.
I think 73 is what, the new 53?
Absolutely.
So what resonates with your readers? What do they enjoy about books aimed at mature adults?
Well, some of the things my reviewers have said. One said, it's giving mature love a place in the romance genre for those who are tired of reading about those beautiful creatures in their 20s who want to have babies. Another one said, I love that the main characters in this novel were mature, and many women's fiction readers will find characters such as the main protagonist easy to relate to. Someone else said, it's nice to know that love and adventure can still be alive in your twilight years. So they feel it's refreshing to read about mature people like themselves. And I'm hoping to continue to grow that audience.
Great. So what's next for you? Are you working on a few more books? What are you working on now?
One of my exciting adventures at the moment, I'm working with a narrator to do an audiobook of The Sand Dollar, one of my Oregon Coast books. Also, my next book, which is a sequel to my last one, The Good Sister, it's called Isabel's Promise, and it's currently with my editor. And I'm writing one after that called A Model Wife. What I like to do in my books is pick up minor characters from earlier books. So the model wife picks up a minor character from previous books and tells her story.
Well, that's great. It sounds like you've got a whole other career going. You were an educator before you retired?
I was. I taught in universities, and then I managed an education department in a health service and in colleges of complementary medicine.
Right. And I think I used the wrong word. Retirement is certainly not what you're doing right now.
Well, if this is retirement, it's a lot of fun.
That's right. Well, great. Well, thank you for your work, and thank you for your advocacy on behalf of older readers and older authors. Thank you for appearing on IndieVoices.
Thank you so much, Howard. I appreciate it.
And now it's time for our indie publishing news update with Dan Holloway. Now, Dan is a man of so many talents and credentials, I'm never really sure how to introduce him. This month, though, I'll call him an innovator because a year ago, he won the Oxford Humanities Innovation Challenge. And I'll call him a mental health activist because last week, he was shortlisted in 2 categories for the Oxford Vice Chancellor's Diversity Award for work on mental health in the workplace. Welcome back to IndieVoices, Dan.
Hi, thank you. It's good to be back.
So before we talk about indie publishing, it's always a pleasure to learn more about what you do outside of your career as an author and a poet. Can you tell me more about your work on mental health in the workplace?
Oh, gosh, yes. Well,
I'm sorry, I surprised you with that question, didn't I?
You did indeed. Well, a colleague and I, Verity Westgate, run a series of training sessions for managers in Oxford to help them to create more inclusive workplaces, to make it easier to talk about mental health in the workplace. And we talk a little bit about our own experiences and just encourage a more open and a more supportive culture around the university. And we delivered our 17th training session today, so that was great. Yes, and apart from that, I do what you imagine I would do and give lots of talks.
You're also coming up with some poetry on the fly. You're delivering closing remarks to a lecture in the form of a performance poem tonight.
Not tonight. On Thursday, I will be delivering the closing remarks to the Oxford Disability Lecture this year. Yes.
So no pressure, but how's that coming along?
I have a couple of lines.
All right. Well, I won't force you at gunpoint to read them to us. So, but only if you want to.
Very good idea that you were.
Okay.
I'm literally I'm a last minute person with everything.
That makes two of us. Okay, so let's talk about the news then. First, net neutrality.
Yeah.
So here's where, as an American, I need to once again apologize to the rest of the world. Some people who took over our government decided to end net neutrality, which could pave the way for a two-tiered internet, one for the rich and one for the rest of us poor slobs. And there are many aspects of this story, but explain to our listeners why they should care about this.
I'll stick to as indie writers because otherwise I'll get too political and I'll go on for too long. Because everyone should care about this. As writers, we should care about it because it potentially very much limits the way we can reach our audiences. For example, those of us who use YouTube, and that's very relevant because obviously we're talking and this podcast will go up on YouTube. It may be that in 5 years' time, a whole bunch of writers and a whole bunch of readers can't afford to pay for the net service that will enable them to access YouTube because it'll be on the premium bandwidth. And so only people who can afford to pay will be able to get it, and everyone else will get a limited service. So it will do that. It will also limit the ways in which we can innovate. If a lot of people on the second tier, for want of a better word, the service they get will be a lot slower. They'll be able to access a lot fewer things. Most people probably remember when Flash first came in and advertisers got really excited about using Flash and none of us could use any websites anymore because they just crashed every time you went on them because everything was trying to do whizzy things.
I do remember, yeah.
And that will be people's lives again. And those of us who want to do exciting things with technology, who want to use technology to the full, if we do that, then we have to accept we're just not going to be able to reach some people. And that, as indies, we rely on finding innovative and interesting and exciting ways of using the technology that should be there for everyone to use. And we're not going to be able to do that as much.
Now, no provider has yet put out a press release saying they can't wait to overcharge and stick it to the customers. So what's the scenario if nothing changes? How will this play out?
Well, it won't happen tomorrow. It will happen over time, and it will get normalized is the word that people use a lot. Interestingly, it shows how much things have got normalized that people no longer use the word normalize about things. Because things that might have seemed unthinkable now are now very thinkable, and that's the way these things tend to play out. So someone will do something in a couple of years' time, there'll be a major outrage, they'll roll back, but they'll roll back 95% of the way, and that 5% extra will remain, and then there'll be someone else will do it, there'll be less of an outrage, and they'll roll back 70%, and that's how it will get normalized, and eventually you'll end up with a different system from the one we have now. That's how I see it playing out.
Let's go to some good news now. Self-publishing is so established, we're actually celebrating anniversaries of services.
Yeah.
And 10 years ago, a self-publishing service with a very action-packed name was founded, Smashwords. And you were one of its first users. Tell us about what it is and what you've done with it.
Smashwords was the first place that enabled you to publish your book to different platforms. I mean, back in the day, I joined in 2009, early in 2009. So just after it had started. And in those days, there weren't even very many ways self-publishers could publish direct with someone like Barnes & Noble or with Amazon. And Smashwords just let you do this. So it was marvelous, and it was clunky. Nothing worked. It chewed your text up and made your books look awful. It was absolutely full of 10-page stories that were just there for free stories and publicity or whatever. It really was frontier stuff, but everyone who used it absolutely loved it, and a lot of that was down to Mark Coker, who started it and is still going with it, and still remains as enthusiastic as he always was about indie publishing. And he's been great and enthusiastic and ambitious and supported his indies all the way. There have been times when he's got it very, very wrong. For example, with his erotica authors, when there was a big argument with PayPal a few years ago. But he's always listened to his authors, and he's always made the author-friendly decision in the end. So although a lot of people now who are starting out will go straight to other services like Draft to Digital or Publish Drive, a lot of us who were there at the start are still very, very fond of Smashwords.
Right. Well, these things are sometimes cyclical. You get in early on a platform and then you get noticed, and then it gets overly crowded, and you can tap dance as loud as you can, and nobody will notice.
I published literary fiction on there. And one of my literary fiction books I had was in the top 10 for several months, and that would never happen now. So
right. No, that's the advantage of getting in early. So, but another anniversary that's being celebrated is a 5-year one, a crowdfunding site called Patreon. Patreon doesn't look for Kickstarter style giant donations, but micro donations, right? In exchange for meeting certain deadlines.
It works in two ways. As a content creator, you can either create content especially for the people who subscribe to you or follow you or support you. So they can pay, for example, you can pay $1 a month for someone to produce a blog or a photograph or a story that only your subscribers can see. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it that's becoming increasingly popular is that people just give you money on a regular basis. So they'll give you money to do what you do, and they don't get anything extra. They just get the pleasure of knowing that they're supporting you and doing what you do well.
Now, realistically, do these people have to be related to you in some way? Your mother and your siblings, and after you go through them and your friends, there really is a support network out there to support authors?
It's very much like Kickstarter, like that you have to reach a tipping point with you build up to a certain level of visibility with people you already know. So that may be family or friends or people on an emailing list. But then there are people out there who are just looking for exciting people to
Now, our fearless leader, ALLi director Orna Ross, recently launched a Patreon page. And as you know, Orna works hard on behalf of other authors, but she's also a poet. So she launched a Patreon page that will force her to produce and publish a poem a month. And she's also interested in investigating whether Patreon can be a viable option for poets. So I guess people have all kinds of reasons for choosing Patreon. So how is this working out for authors? What have you heard?
Well, I mean, it's a mixed bag more than anything else. It seems to be working out quite well for nonfiction writers. It suits people who write short form more than it suits people who write novels because of this idea of producing regular content for people. Right. So it suits journalists quite well. It suits poets quite well. It suits short story writers quite well, and also artists and photographers. So it maybe suits novelists less well.
Do they produce maybe a chapter at a time, or this is the complete finished work?
I think people tend to want a finished something. Not necessarily something polished or long, but something that's a complete discrete item that they can say is theirs and that they've supported. So I think probably people who do serial writing at the moment, there are other avenues of doing that. Obviously Wattpad doesn't pay, but there are other ways of serializing your work and possibly monetizing it. But not so much for people who write short-form nonfiction and short stories and poetry. Okay,
well, it sounds fascinating, and I'm all in favor of writers getting paid for their work. So,
Quite.
So I think that's probably all the time we have for now. I know you have to go catch a train or a bus or an Uber or whatever, however it is you get around over there.
Not an Uber, a bus, definitely.
And I can't wait to find out what you're up to next month so I can introduce you in a different way. Maybe you'll take up skydiving next.
I would love to.
Okay, well, we'll do that. Poetry skydiving.
Fabulous.
And we'll do that for the month of June. Thanks, Dan. We'll talk to you next month.
Thank you very much indeed, Howard. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to IndieVoices with me, Howard Lovy, Managing Editor of the Alliance of Independent Authors. Thank you to my guests, Claire Baldry and Maggie Christensen, and my co-host, Dan Holloway. Find more author advice and tools at our Self-Publishing Advice Center, selfpublishingadvice.org. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org. Now, what are you waiting for? Go write and publish.